Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where oaths are darker than blood itself. Imagine this. You find yourself standing at the edge of an ancient forest, the kind where the trees seem to whisper in voices that only the wind understands. The air is heavy with tension, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. You can almost feel a chill, but it's not the temperature, it's the weight of something far more sinister. You're bound not just by the land, but by a promise, an oath so ancient that even the gods tremble at its echo. You won't survive this, at least not the way you think you will. There's no turning back now, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight, you're about to hear the tale of Volsung, a father whose blood-stained vow cast an ominous shadow over his family. For generations, Volsung, a mighty warrior of the north, once swore an oath of vengeance upon the murder of his brother Sigurd. This wasn't just a typical revenge. This was a curse in the making. A promise made in blood, one that bound not just Volsung, but his children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, to a fate of suffering and death. A bloodline torn apart, not by their own actions, but by a sworn oath their father made. Vengeance was not a matter of justice. It became an unrelenting force, one that no mortal could escape. You can feel the bind of that oath tightening, can't you? Imagine living your life knowing that the actions of your father are the reason for your struggles. Not just any father, but one who made promises so dark that even the gods themselves would question their morality. Volsung's story is the essence of those promises, the kind that once uttered cannot be undone. It's a tale of revenge, betrayal, and the cold hand of fate. And as the blood-stained oath unfolds, you'll see how it tears apart everyone it touches. Volsung's story begins with the death of his brother Sigurd. It wasn't just any death. Sigurd was killed in a ruthless, heartless way, his life extinguished at the hands of the deceitful King Sigurd. Volsung, like any honorable man, swore vengeance on the murderer. This wasn't just a brother avenging a brother, it was a promise to make things right, to see justice done by any means necessary. But little did Volsung know that his promise would lead him and every generation after him down a dark and endless path. The curse, you see, wasn't just about killing a murderer. It wasn't as simple as killing one person and calling it quits. Volsung made his oath before the gods themselves, binding it to the very fabric of fate. His words, powerful and binding, twisted the fabric of destiny, setting in motion a series of events that would plague his family for centuries. And just like that, fate began to rewrite itself. Historians still argue whether the gods had a hand in orchestrating this tragedy, or if it was simply a twisted turn of events. Some say the gods were playing their own game, testing Volsung's honor. Others argue that it was just another twist of fate, one of those bizarre turns of the universe, where one man's action sets in motion a series of catastrophic consequences. Whatever the cause, the results were catastrophic. Volsung's children inherited his oath. This wasn't just a family curse. It was a cosmic debt, one that would demand payment in blood. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Volsung's vow, which had been made in good faith and out of a desire for justice, began to unravel. You see, it wasn't just about avenging his brother anymore. The oath began to take on a life of its own, a living, breathing entity that haunted his children. It wasn't long before Volsung's sons, Sigmund and Sinfuli, were caught up in the madness of this vengeance that had no end. No matter what they did, no matter how they tried to escape it, the curse followed them. The gods had their part in this as well, and their involvement only served to deepen the tragedy. By the time Volsung's bloodline began to tear apart, the family had already been marked by the curse of the oath. Sigmund, the eldest son, was forced to take on the burden of his father's promise, vowing to avenge Volsung's death, to kill King Sigurd for what he had done. But Sigurd, ever the treacherous king, was a formidable foe. In the battle that followed, Sigmund was left near death, his sword shattered, and his life hanging by a thread. It was only with the help of the goddess Freya that Sigmund could continue his struggle. But even then, the price was steep. Freya's intervention was not without consequence, and her actions would later come back to haunt Sigmund and his heirs. This curse, which had once seemed like a simple promise, had become a force so powerful, so uncontrollable, that it tore through Volsung's family like a wildfire. Each new generation was born into this fate, cursed to repeat the cycle of vengeance, of blood for blood. And though Sigmund and his sons would continue to fight, to carry on the work of their father, the curse was always there, lurking in the background, ready to claim its due. It's fascinating, isn't it? How a single promise, made in the heat of a moment, can spiral into something so catastrophic. You think to yourself, I could never be in a position to make such a vow. But in the world of Norse mythology, oaths were sacred, even more so than life itself. Volsung's oath was like a contract with the gods, a debt that had to be repaid, no matter the cost. And that's the chilling thing about this curse. It's not just a tale of revenge. It's about what happens when you bind yourself to a promise so dark that it takes on a life of its own. It's a warning that sometimes the very act of vengeance can curse you, forcing you to carry the weight of an ancient promise that will never let you go. As you sit here listening to this, imagine being trapped by something you can't escape. Imagine knowing that the blood of your ancestors is the reason you suffer. And then think about what it means to be free of a curse. Because in the world of Norse myth, freedom is never guaranteed, not even after the final blow is struck. The blood-stained oath Volsung made might have been fulfilled, but the curse never truly ended. It just changed forms from one generation to the next. You ever hear a story that feels like it came out of the fog? Something so misted, so shadowed, that you can barely see the details, but the weight of it lingers. Tonight, we're going to step into that fog. Picture this. You're standing in a dimly lit forest, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. A thick mist rolls in, swallowing the path ahead, and just as it seems you're about to lose your way, you hear it, the faintest whisper, like a breeze tugging at your ear. You can feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful, watching you. Something that is both a part of you and yet utterly foreign. You might not survive this encounter. The mist has a way of disorienting you, leading you down paths you might wish you had never walked. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. What if I told you that Norse mythology holds a tale about three sisters, daughters of the mist, whose destinies are tied to a secret so dark, so cursed, that even the gods dare not speak of it? The daughters of the mist are figures that most have forgotten or simply never heard of. But their story is as chilling as the very fog they emerge from. This isn't your typical tale of gods and heroes, but one of betrayal, hidden magic, and fates sealed by forces far beyond mortal comprehension. Their names ran, but each carrying a curse that was intertwined with their very existence. Together, they were bound to the mist that enveloped their homeland, cursed to live in the shadows of their fathers' violent deeds. This wasn't some gentle curse either. This was one forged from blood, sacrifice, and a mistake so great that its ripple would affect the entire world. And the eldest daughter ruled over the sea, her hands as cold and merciless as the waves she commanded. She wasn't just a goddess of the ocean, no. She was something far darker. Her very touch could drag mortals into the abyss, never to be seen again. Imagine being caught in her gaze in the cold, unforgiving sea, where no help could come. Historians argue whether Ren was merely a force of nature or a reflection of the worst kind of vengeance. Was she just a goddess, Or was her rage born from a deep, personal betrayal? Then there was Hel, the second daughter, who inherited her father's kingdom of death. Hel's realm was a place where the souls of the dead would either be rewarded or punished, but most, unfortunately, found themselves in her cold embrace. It's said that Hel's appearance was as chilling as her domain. Half of her body was as beautiful as the morning, while the other was the grotesque, decayed form of death. She wasn't evil per se. She was a reflection of the harsh reality of mortality. But what made her particularly terrifying was how she was tied to the curse of her father's past. Her role as the ruler of the underworld and her control over the dead was her inheritance, a price she had to pay for a family's past sins. And then there was Skadi, the youngest of the three. Skadi was the embodiment of winter, of frozen landscapes that could trap you forever if you weren't careful. She was the goddess of skiing and hunting, a fierce protector of her people, but also a symbol of isolation and revenge. You see, Skadi's rage wasn't directed outwardly, but inwardly, towards her father. Her father had wronged her, had stolen something precious from her that could never be returned her home. And in her pursuit of vengeance, she wandered the frozen mountains. Was she seeking justice, or was her heart just as cold and bitter as the land she roamed? Some say she was simply trying to right a wrong, while others argue that her thirst for vengeance was far deeper, rooted in the loss of her family and her place in the world. But what makes the Daughters of the Mist so tragic, so utterly cursed, is not just their powers or their ability to command forces beyond comprehension. It's the fact that they were born into this fate, cursed by their father's actions, trapped in a web of betrayal that stretched through the ages. They were bound to the mist, not by their own will, but by the sins of their progenitor. Their father, Injured, the sea god, whose love affair with the giantess Skadi led to a disastrous union that would ripple through generations. Injured's affair with Skadi, though filled with passion and deep affection, was built on betrayal. It was this union, this binding, that brought forth the Daughters of the Mist. Skadi, despite her strength and defiance, could not escape the consequences of her father's actions. She was bound, like her sisters, to a fate sealed long before she was born. The mist was a manifestation of that fate, a constant reminder that their lives would never be their own. It was as if the very air they breathed was cursed, tainting their every step, whispering the secrets of their heritage into their ears, until the sound of it became unbearable. Can you feel the weight of it? To be born into a legacy of betrayal, of curses that were set in motion before your first breath. How would you even begin to free yourself from something so inescapable, something that defined your very existence? The Daughters of the Mist tried, each in their own way, to break free from the chains of their father's mistakes. Some sought vengeance, others sought peace, but none of them found what they truly needed: freedom. As their story unfolds, you begin to realize that their lives were not just bound by the mist, but by the very fabric of destiny itself. A family cursed by blood, bound by promises they never made, but were forced to live through. The question isn't whether they could escape their fate, it's whether they ever truly wanted to. You stand there in the mist, watching their story unfold, and as you do, you can't help but wonder, what would you do if the curse of your lineage was handed down to you? Would you fight against it? Or would you embrace it, knowing that some things in life are simply unavoidable? You've heard of Loki, right? The trickster god, the one who never seems to stop causing chaos. But what if I told you that Loki's tricks weren't just some harmless pranks? What if I told you that his greatest deception wasn't a joke at all, but a betrayal so deep, so dark, that it set off a chain of events leading to the fall of the gods themselves? Picture this. You're standing in the midst of a massive storm, thunder crashing all around you as lightning splits the sky. But the storm isn't just nature's fury, it's the wrath of a god. Loki, the master of deception, weaving his darkest trick yet, and the gods, well, they have no idea what's coming. So, Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Lurk is often seen as the mischievous god, the one who loves to stir trouble for fun. But beneath that playful exterior lies a far more sinister character. Loki's greatest trick was not some harmless prank. No, it was a scheme that involved the very fabric of fate itself, and it would lead to one of the most devastating betrayals in all of Norse mythology. You see, Loki wasn't just causing chaos for fun. He was playing a much bigger game, one that even the gods couldn't have predicted. It all started with a seemingly harmless wager. Loki, ever the schemer, made a bet with the gods. He promised them that he could make a creature so powerful that no god could defeat it. He claimed that this beast would be more fearsome than any other, and that it would be a force to reckon with. The gods, as proud and confident as they were, agreed. They thought it would be an easy victory. After all, how could a mere mortal trick them? But Loki wasn't thinking small. No, this was a trick of epic proportions. The creature he had in mind was not just any beast, it was a wolf. A creature whose power was so immense that no one could predict the consequences of its existence. Loki sought out a giantess Angrboda, and together they conceived a creature unlike any other, Fenrir. The wolf destined to change everything. Fenrir, though born of Loki, was no ordinary beast. From the moment he was born, it was clear that he was unlike anything the gods had ever seen. He grew at an alarming rate, and with each passing day, the gods realized that Fenrir was more than they could handle. His power was beyond anything they could control, and the fear of what he might become began to haunt their dreams. Historians still argue whether Loki knew what would happen with Fenrir, or whether he truly underestimated the consequences of his actions. Some believe that Loki was simply playing the part of a mischievous god, not realizing the full extent of the disaster he was about to unleash. Others argue that Loki was playing a much more dangerous game, one where he knew exactly what would happen, but reveled in the chaos it would cause. Either way, the gods were left in a bind. They couldn't kill Fenrir outright. He was too powerful. But they also knew that something had to be done. In their fear, the gods devised a plan. They sought out the help of the dwarves, the master, craftsmen of the realm, to forge a chain that could bind Fenrir. The chain, named Gleipnir, was made of impossible materials, things like the sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of a mountain, and the breath of a fish. It was, as you might imagine, a work of magic and skill that no ordinary creature could escape. And so they brought Fenrir to the place where they planned to bind him, promising him that if he could break free of the chain, he would be free to roam as he pleased. But here's the twist. Loki, the very god who had conceived Fenrir, was the one who led him into the trap. Loki knew what would happen the moment the chain was placed on Fenrir. He knew that the wolf would be bound, and he knew that this would lead to a series of tragic events. The gods were so sure that Fenrir would break the chain and prove his strength that they didn't realize what they had done. They had, in fact, sealed their own doom. When Fenrir realized that he was being tricked, he was enraged. He struggled against the chain, and in the process, his teeth found their mark. He bit off the hand of the god Tyr, one of the bravest and most noble of the gods. Tyr's sacrifice was a price that would forever change the god's relationship with Loki and with the very nature of betrayal itself. Historians still argue about the significance of Tyr's loss. Some see it as a sacrifice for the greater good, while others view it as a tragic reminder of the gods' inability to foresee the consequences of their own actions. But what truly makes this trick so dark, so sinister, is that Loki, the very god who brought Fenrir into the world, was the one who led the gods to their downfall. He was the mastermind behind the whole thing, orchestrating the events that would lead to the breaking of the gods. Loki wasn't just a trickster in this story. He was the architect of the gods' destruction. He had set into motion a plan that would lead to the eventual death of the gods in Ragnarok. And that's the ultimate tragedy of Loki's darkest trick. He didn't just betray the gods, he betrayed the very nature of their existence. By playing with fate, by manipulating the threads of destiny, Loki set in motion a series of events that would ultimately tear apart everything the gods held dear. The death of Tyr, the chaining of Fenrir, and the eventual fall of Asgard. These were all pieces in Loki's game. And when the dust settles, Loki will be standing there, not as a mere trickster, but as the god who tore apart the very foundation of the gods themselves. You stand there, watching the gods fall, and you can't help but wonder, was Loki truly just a trickster? Or was he something far darker, something that understood the true cost of chaos and reveled in the destruction it caused? In the end, the gods learned a hard lesson, that sometimes the greatest betrayal comes not from an enemy, but from within. Now imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a dark, cold sea, waves crashing violently against the rocks beneath you. The wind howls in your ears almost like it's trying to warn you, urging you to turn back. You don't know exactly why, but you feel the chill of death hanging in the air. And it's not just the sea breeze. Something ancient stirs beneath the surface. And as the storm picks up, you begin to feel that sinking sensation in your stomach, a sense that you might not survive the night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sea is full of mysteries, both beautiful and terrifying. One such mystery is the tale of Aegir's daughter, the ghost who haunts the deep waters. But this isn't your typical ghost story. This is a story steeped in vengeance, a curse so twisted that it stretches across generations. It's a tale of a father's sins, his daughter's death, and the haunting revenge that followed. Aegir was a mighty sea god, ruler of the oceans, and he had a daughter named Anne. But Ran was no ordinary sea goddess. She was a goddess of the drowned, a figure who could pull sailors to their watery graves with nothing more than a glance. Yet, her power wasn't just born of the sea. It was a product of an ancient curse that began with her father Aegir. You see, Aegir wasn't just a god of the sea. He was also a figure of immense greed and lust for power. His ambition was greater than any mortal could comprehend, and it would ultimately lead to a tragic series of events. It all started with a forbidden love affair, love that would seal Ran's fate and set in motion a chain of events that would haunt the seas for eternity. Aegir, driven by his insatiable desire for power, had an affair with a mysterious being from the deepest parts of the ocean. This being, a dark and powerful entity, was not a god, but a creature born from the very essence of the sea itself. Together, they conceived Ed. But this child, born of such darkness, was never meant to be. Historians still argue whether Aegir's affair with this creature was one of desperation, driven by a need for greater power, or if it was simply the act of a selfish god who cared only for his own ambitions. What is certain, however, is that Aegir's actions would come at a terrible price. Ran, his daughter, was destined for tragedy. The very waters that gave her life would eventually drown her in a sea of vengeance. A vengeance born from the sins of her father. Ran's death wasn't just any death, was a death bound in the deepest curses of the sea. She drowned, yes, but her spirit never left. It became a shadow beneath the waves, a haunting presence that could feel every ripple of the sea and every soul it claimed. Her body was never found, but her spirit became a constant presence for those who dared to sail too far from shore. As the years passed, Ran's ghost became a legend among sailors. They whispered of her cold touch, of the way she would lure them into the depths with her soft voice, her beauty, and her promise of peace. But those who followed her whispers never returned. It was said that Ren's ghost, fueled by the grief and anger of her untimely death, sought to claim the souls of those who crossed her path, pulling them into the watery grave where she had been left to die. But Rand's vengeance didn't end there. It was her father's betrayal that set the entire tragedy in motion, and it was her father's sins that she would ultimately seek to punish. The ocean, once a place of life and sustenance, became a cold, unforgiving graveyard. It was said that Aegir, feeling the weight of his daughter's wrath, tried to appease her ghost by offering sacrifices to the sea. But it was too late. The curse had already taken root, and no offering, no plea, could undo the damage, and S ghost would continue to haunt the sea for eternity, pulling sailors to their deaths and ensuring that no one could escape the vengeance of a lost daughter. The sea became a place of fear, a place where sailors whispered her name before setting out on their journeys, knowing that the moment they left the shore, they could be claimed by her ghost. The true tragedy of Asa's story, though, lies not in the fact that she was a vengeful spirit, but in the fact that she was a daughter seeking justice for a father's betrayal. Her death, though tragic, was not the end of her suffering. It was only the beginning of a haunting that would never end. The sea, which had once been a source of life, became a reflection of Rand's eternal sorrow and rage. Those who ventured out into the deep waters could never be sure if they would return, if they would fall victim to Ran's curse, or if they would be swallowed by the ocean. A fitting fate for one who had been so deeply wronged. And here you are, standing at the edge of that very same sea, wondering, is Eris' ghost still there, waiting for someone else to claim? Could you be the next soul to fall victim to her wrath? The sea is full of mysteries, and Asghost is one that will never truly be understood and feared. Imagine standing at the edge of a great battlefield. The ground beneath your feet is soaked with the blood of gods and men, the cries of those lost to time echoing in the wind. You feel the weight of betrayal in your chest, a deep, gnawing ache, something that twists your insides. Betrayal is a powerful thing, you know. It can destroy a person's soul, tear them apart piece by piece. And as the wind whispers your name, you can feel the familiar sting of it. The betrayal of a god, a friend, a loved one, it's all the same in the end. And here, in this place, you might not survive the consequences. Don't. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tale of betrayal in Norse mythology is not just about one god's treachery. It's about the entire fabric of the gods themselves being torn apart. It begins with the gods, those mighty beings who thought themselves untouchable, invincible in their realm. But even the strongest gods have their weaknesses, and none more so than when it comes to matters of trust. One god, a figure of immense power, was betrayed by one of his closest allies. It would change the course of fate forever. It started with Baldur, the shining light among the gods. Baldur was loved by all, admired for his beauty, strength, and kindness. His light brought peace to the heavens, and he was the favorite of the gods. But like all good things, his time would come to an end. It was a simple prophecy that began the unraveling of Baldur's fate, one that no god could ignore, not even Odin, the All-Father himself. It was foretold that Baldur would die, and no matter how much the gods tried to prevent it, the prophecy would come true. Historians still argue whether the gods had any way of stopping Baldur's death, or if it was a fate that was sealed the moment he was born. Some say that they could have prevented his death by listening to the signs, while others argued that they were simply blind to the forces that were working against them. What is clear, however, is that the gods did everything in their power to protect Baldur, to make sure that the prophecy would not come to pass. They sought the help of every creature, every force of nature, to ensure that Baldur could not be harmed. It was then that the gods made their mistake. They turned to Loki, the trickster god, the one who could change his shape and his intentions at will. Loki, who was always willing to play both sides, agreed to help them. But what the gods didn't know was that Loki had his own plans that would ultimately betray them all. Loki, in his trickster fashion, saw an opportunity to exploit the gods' fear and their desperation. He discovered that the one thing Baldur was vulnerable to was mistletoe. It seemed harmless enough, a plant that was too small to be of any real concern. But Loki, ever the schemer, knew that if he crafted an arrow from mistletoe, he could bring about the downfall of the most beloved god in the Norse pantheon. He tricked Baldur's blind brother Hr into throwing the arrow at Baldur, thus fulfilling the prophecy and striking Baldur down. The gods were horrified. They had been betrayed, not just by Loki, but by their own inability to see the treachery lurking so close. In that moment, the heavens trembled, and the very fabric of trust among the gods was shattered. Baldur's death was not just the loss of a god, it was the end of an era. The gods had been betrayed by one of their own, and the consequences would ripple throughout the realms. As the gods mourned Baldur's death, they realized the depth of Loki's treachery. He had brought about the death of the one they loved most, the one who had brought light to their world. But Loki didn't stop there. His betrayal was not just a single act, it was part of a larger plan, a plan that would eventually lead to the downfall of all the gods. Loki, the god who had once been one of them, would now lead them to their doom. The betrayal of Baldur set in motion a chain of events that led to Ragnarok, the end of the world. The gods had no choice but to prepare for the final battle, the battle that would see their destruction. But even as they fought, they could never escape the sting of betrayal. The gods knew that Loki had been behind Baldur's death all along, and in that knowledge, they began to realize that their fate was sealed. No matter how hard they fought, no matter how powerful they were, they could not outrun the consequences of betrayal. And as you stand there, watching the gods prepare for their inevitable destruction, you can't help but wonder what would you do if you were in their place. If someone you trusted, someone you called an ally, turned on you in the most unimaginable way, would you be able to forgive them? Or would you seek revenge, just as the gods did? Betrayal, after all, is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. It can destroy friendships, families, and even entire civilizations. And in the case of the gods, it led to their very downfall. You realize that no one is immune to betrayal, not even the gods. It's a force that transcends time and place, something that strikes at the heart of trust itself. And as the gods prepare for the final battle, you can feel the weight of their fate. They have no choice but to face what is coming, and in that moment, they know the truth. Betrayal has sealed their doom. Imagine stepping into a land where the snow is eternal, where the wind howls through the jagged mountains and the air bites at your skin. You trudge through the icy terrain, each step sinking deeper into the cold, the silence almost suffocating. This is Skadi's world, a realm of isolation, where only the strong survive. And vengeance is as cold as the snow beneath your feet. And as you feel the crunch of the snow underfoot, you realize one thing. This is not a place for forgiveness. Here, vengeance is a fire that burns with a frost so deep that it can never be quenched. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Skadi, the goddess of winter, is a figure steeped in vengeance, a goddess whose anger is as cold as the lands she rules. Her story begins with betrayal, with the loss of something dear, and it's in this loss that her thirst for vengeance is born. Skadi wasn't always the vengeful goddess you know today. She was once a daughter, a child of the giants, living a peaceful life in the land of the mountains. But that life was shattered the day her father Tejazi was killed by the gods in a cruel betrayal. His death was the spark that ignited the fury within Skadia, fury that would lead her down a dark path. Tejazi, a giant known for his cunning and strength, had long been a thorn in the side of the gods. But when he attempted to steal the goddess Idun and her magical apples that granted the gods eternal youth, he crossed a line that could never be undone. In retaliation, the gods killed Thijazi, and Skadi, his daughter, was left to pick up the pieces. But the gods didn't expect Skadi to respond the way she did. They didn't realize that this was no ordinary giantess. Skadi's heart was as cold as the mountains she called home, and she would not let her father's death go unpunished. Historians still argue whether Skadi's actions were justified. Was she right to seek vengeance for her father, or was her wrath simply a reflection of her pride and grief? Some see her as a symbol of justice, while others view her as a figure consumed by bitterness. What is undeniable, however, is that Skadi's quest for revenge was a force of nature. She descended upon the gods, demanding justice for her father's death, and in her fury, she made a demand that no god could ignore. She would have her vengeance, and she would not rest until the gods paid. The gods, ever fearful of Skadi's strength, tried to appease her. They offered her riches, land, and even the promise of a marriage to one of them. But Skadi, cold and unyielding, was not interested in their offerings. She wanted justice, and she would stop at nothing to get it. Finally, the gods, realizing that they had no choice but to appease her, struck a deal. Skadi would be allowed to choose a husband from among the gods. But there was one condition: she would have to choose based on the sound of their feet alone. The gods, knowing that their appearance was no match for Skadi's wrath, hoped that this strange condition would allow them to trick her into choosing someone she wouldn't want. The trick worked for a time. Skadi chose Unjerd, the sea god, based on the sound of his feet. But when she saw him in person, she was horrified to discover that he did not belong in her cold, snowy realm. The sea god Unjerd was a creature of warmth, a god who thrived in the oceans, not the mountains. The marriage, though seemingly a victory for the gods, was anything but. Skadi was not content with the arrangement, and her anger only deepened as she realized that she had been forced into a union with a god she did not want. The tension between Skadi and Unjerd became unbearable, and Skadi's rage only grew. She felt trapped, bound by the gods' trickery, and in her heart, she knew that her revenge was far from over. Skadi's fury simmered beneath the surface, and she bided her time, knowing that eventually the gods would pay for their betrayal. Her vengeance was not to be a quick strike, but a slow, inexorable force that would consume them all as the years passed. Skadi's presence in the world of the gods remained a constant reminder of the cost of betrayal. Her icy demeanor and cold heart became the stuff of legend, and the gods, though they had survived her initial wrath, knew that they had not seen the last of her vengeance. Skadi would not rest until she had exacted her full measure of justice. And then came Ragnarok, the end of all things. Skadi, like the other gods, was fated to face her end in the final battle. But even in the face of death, Skadi's heart remained unchanged. She fought with the fury of 1,000 winters, her rage as cold as the mountains where she had once ruled. Her vengeance was complete, not just against the gods who had wronged her, but against fate itself. Skadi had become the embodiment of vengeance, a force so powerful that even the gods could not escape its reach. As you stand in the snow, watching the battle unfold, you can feel the cold of Skadi's rage. You know that her vengeance, like the winter itself, is eternal. It will never fade, never melt away. Skadi's story is a reminder that revenge, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. It is a force of nature, as inevitable as the changing seasons, and it will consume everything in its path. And now you find yourself asking, how far would you go for vengeance? Would you, like Skadi, seek justice for a betrayal that cut to the core, or would you too be consumed by the cold of revenge, forever bound to the icy mountains of your past? Imagine being caught in a moment where the future is slipping through your fingers, and yet you have to make a decision that could change everything. Picture the gods, standing in a circle, surrounded by a dark, immense wolf whose eyes glint with the cold light of impending destruction. The air is thick with tension, as the gods, once so certain of their own power, are now faced with a creature they can neither control nor truly understand. The beast before them is Fenrir, and it is not just a wolf. It is the embodiment of fate itself, a creature born of prophecy, whose strength could bring about the end of everything. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the dark whispers of impending doom, the gods bind him, thinking they are securing their future. But fate, as always, has a way of twisting everything. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of Fenrir is one of the most tragic and terrifying in all of Norse mythology. A tale of betrayal, fear, and miscalculation. Fenrir was not just any wolf. He was the son of Loki, the god of mischief, and the giantess Angerboa. From the moment he was born, the gods could sense that Fenrir was different. He grew at an alarming rate, faster than any wolf they had ever seen, and with each passing day, the gods realized that Fenrir was destined for greatness, though what kind of greatness they could not yet see. All they knew was that this beast was a threat, and they could not afford to let him roam free. The gods knew of the prophecy. Fenrir was destined to play a central role in Ragnarok, the end of the world. It was said that he would slay Odin the Allfather and bring about the downfall of the gods, and so, terrified of this fate, the gods decided that the only way to stop Fenrir was to bind him, to tie him down before he could fulfill his prophecy. But the gods had underestimated Fenrir. They thought they could control him, believing that their combined strength would be enough to hold him. They first tried to chain him with a series of heavy, ordinary chains, but Fenrir broke them with ease. And so they turned to a new solution, one that would require the skill of the dwarves. They asked the dwarves to create a chain so strong that no creature could break it, a chain made from the impossible. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of mountains, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of birds. This chain, called Gleipnir, was forged with the power of magic, and would bind Fenrir more securely than anything else could. But there was a catch. In order to bind Fenrir with Gleipnir, the gods had to gain his trust. They knew that Fenrir would not submit to being chained unless he was tricked, and so they devised a plan. They went to Fenrir, promising that if he could break the chain, he would be set free. Fenrir, wary of the gods, but intrigued by the challenge, agreed to let them bind him, but only on the condition that one of the gods would place their hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. The gods, eager to secure Fenrir, reluctantly agreed to this condition, and Tyr, the god of war and justice, stepped forward to place his hand in the wolf's mouth. Historians still argue whether the gods were justified in their actions. Was it right to betray Fenrir, to trick him into submission with a promise they had no intention of keeping? Some argue that the gods had no choice. They had to protect themselves, even if it meant sacrificing their honor. Others believe that Fenrir's fate was sealed the moment he was born, that there was no escaping the prophecy, no matter what the gods did. But what is undeniable is that Fenrir's binding was a betrayal in itself, one that would set in motion the events that would lead to Ragnarok. When the gods chained Fenrir with Gleipnir, they thought they had one. But Fenrir was not so easily deceived. As the chain tightened around his body, he struggled, thrashing against it with all his might. And when he realized that the gods had tricked him, his fury knew no bounds. In a final act of defiance, Fenrir bit off Tyr's hand, a sacrifice that would forever mark the god's fate. Tyr, brave and noble, had placed his hand in Fenrir's mouth as a symbol of trust, but in return, he lost his hand, a price too high for any god to pay. As the gods stood victorious, they failed to realize that they had made a grave mistake. By chaining Fenrir, they had set the stage for his inevitable escape. for the prophecy to come true. The binding of Fenrir, far from being a victory, was a mark of their own downfall. They had trapped a beast who would one day escape, and when he did, the gods would not be able to stop him. Fenrir's fate was not in their hands, and the chains they had used to bind him would become the very reason for their destruction. When Ragnarok comes, and Fenrir breaks free from his chains, he will bring with him the chaos and destruction the gods so feared. He will fulfill the prophecy, slaying Odin and marking the end of the old gods. But the gods, in their arrogance and fear, did not see that their attempt to bind Fenrir was the very thing that would lead to their downfall. The wolf, whose strength was bound by their own actions, would become the instrument of their destruction. As you watch the gods prepare for their final battle, you can't help but wonder, what if they had handled Fenrir differently? What if they had allowed him to live freely, without trying to control him? Would the prophecy still have come true, or had their actions sealed their fate long before the final battle? Fenrir's story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the very things we try to control will end up controlling us. The gods, in their desperation to protect themselves, unknowingly set the stage for their own destruction. Imagine walking into a place where the very air feels heavy with grief, where the temperature drops with every step you take, and the shadows seem to stretch far longer than they should. You find yourself in a realm that feels suspended in time, not quite alive, but not quite dead either. This is Hell's realm, a place where the souls of those who did not die in battle wander endlessly, trapped in eternal darkness. It is cold here, colder than anything you've ever known, and the very ground beneath your feet seems to absorb your every movement. And you know deep down that this place will never let you go. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Hel's domain is one of the most chilling in Norse mythology. She is the goddess of the underworld, the daughter of Loki, and the giantess Angerboa, and she rules over a realm as cold and unforgiving as her heart. But unlike many gods and goddesses, Hel does not concern herself with the souls of the brave or the worthy. Her realm is for those who did not die in battle, those whose deaths were deemed insignificant by the gods, and in this place there is no escape. Those who find themselves in Hel's grasp are trapped forever, never to see the light of the living again. Hel's appearance is as terrifying as her domain. She is said to be half living, half dead. Her upper body is that of a beautiful woman, but her lower half is a decayed, lifeless corpse. Her cold, emotionless demeanor is enough to freeze anyone who dares to enter her realm, and her eyes, pale, unblinking, seem to see through you, past all pretense, to the very depths of your soul. To meet her gaze is to be reminded that death is inevitable, that nothing in this world can escape the finality of the grave. The souls that enter Hel's realm are not tormented in the way one might expect. There are no flames here, no torturous punishments like in other mythologies. Instead, the souls of the dead are left to wander in a cold, empty void, their pain born from the endless isolation and the lack of purpose. They are forgotten by the gods, their lives slipping away into nothingness. And yet, Hel's rule is not without its own form of justice. While she does not seek vengeance the way her father Loki does, she ensures that the souls under her care are not free to leave, no matter how they may beg or plead. Historians still argue about Hel's true nature. Some view her as a necessary part of the cosmic order, a keeper of the balance between life and death. Others see her as a symbol of cold, unfeeling fate, a reminder that even the most insignificant death will eventually be met with the same indifference. Was Hel a cruel goddess, or was she simply fulfilling a role that had been thrust upon her from birth? The truth is, we may never know. What is certain, however, is that she is a powerful figure in the world of Norse mythology, and her realm is one that none can escape. But the true tragedy of Hel's reign is not just the fate of the souls who dwell in her realm, it is the fact that she is the child of Loki, a being born of chaos and mischief. Hel was cast into the underworld by Odin himself, banished to the land of the dead, as a means of ensuring that she would never pose a threat to the gods. Yet, in doing so, Odin sealed the fate of his own people. For while the gods thought they had imprisoned Hel, they had only created a force that would one day play a central role in their own downfall. When Ragnarok comes, Hel will rise from her realm, leading the dead into battle against the gods. Her army of souls will fight alongside the giants, and together, they will bring about the destruction of the gods and the world they have known. It is said that Hel herself will face her father Loki in the final battle, and that it will be the ultimate test of her power. Will she choose to follow in her father's footsteps, causing chaos and destruction, or will she claim the throne of the gods, taking the place of those she has long been separated from? The question remains unanswered, but one thing is clear. Hel is not merely a goddess of death, she is a force that cannot be ignored. Her reign of shadows is a constant reminder that death is not something to be feared, but something to be accepted. And in the end, when the gods fall and the world ends, Hel will remain an eternal presence in the afterlife, watching over the souls of the forgotten. As you stand in the darkness of her realm, you can't help but wonder, what if you too found yourself in Hel's grasp? Would you endure the eternal cold and isolation, or would you seek to escape, to find a way back to the warmth of life? Hel's realm is a place of inevitability, a place where even the gods cannot escape their fate. And though she may rule over the dead, it is her silence, her coldness, that truly defines her. For in the end, it is not the gods' deaths that will be the greatest tragedy, is the fact that even the most powerful beings in existence can be forgotten, left to wander in the shadows of time. Imagine a world where light is fading, where the very air feels heavy, and where a god who was once thought to be immortal is now slipping from the grasp of the world. You stand in the ruins of Asgard, watching as the sun dips below the horizon, casting the gods' home into shadows. The silence is deafening. But then, as the darkness deepens, you hear the soft echo of footsteps, the quiet hum of a god returning. Baldur, the god of light and beauty, who was thought to be lost forever, has returned. It is one of tragedy. And the question lingers in the air. What has become of a god who was once so beloved, so pure, when he is forced to return to a world that has changed beyond recognition? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Baldur's death was one of the most devastating events in Norse mythology. It was foretold that Baldur, the radiant god, would be killed, and despite the god's best efforts to prevent it, the prophecy came true. Baldur was slain by the hand of his own brother Hr, who was manipulated by Loki into throwing a mistletoe dart at Baldur. The god's death was not just a loss of life, it was the loss of hope, of light, of everything that the gods had come to stand for. Baldur was the shining beacon of the Aesir, the god whose presence brought peace and happiness. And with his death, the very fabric of the gods began to unravel. But what if Baldur's death was not the end of his story? What if there was more to his fate than simply being slain in the name of prophecy? The gods did not simply mourn his death, they sought to undo it. And so, Baldur's soul was kept in the underworld, his body buried, and the gods began to search for a way to bring him back. Yet, the cost of resurrecting a god was steep, and no one could predict the consequences of tampering with fate. Baldur's return was not just a matter of life and death, it was a matter of the very balance of the cosmos. Historians still argue whether Baldur's resurrection was ever truly possible, or whether the gods simply believed it could be done. Some say that if the gods had succeeded in bringing Baldur back, the world would have been restored to its former stata world of light and peace, untouched by the darkness of Loki's betrayal. Others argue that Baldur's resurrection was never meant to be. They believe that the gods, in their arrogance, thought they could defy the will of fate. In their desperation, they broke the natural laws that governed the world, and in doing so, they sealed their own doom, Baldur's death. And the gods' attempt to undo it is a powerful symbol of the struggle between fate and free will. The gods, despite all their power and wisdom, could not escape the inevitable. No matter how hard they tried to change Baldur's fate, no matter how many sacrifices they made, the prophecy was destined to come true. Baldur's return, like his death, was part of the larger, unchangeable cycle that governed the universe. The gods' inability to escape fate, their attempt to defy it, only brought them closer to their own downfall. But in the end, Baldur's story is not just one of death and resurrection, is a story of what happens when the gods themselves are forced to confront the limits of their own power. Baldur's return was not a happy reunion. He was no longer the god of light and beauty that he once was. His return was a shadow of the god he had been, a reminder of the tragic consequences of defying fate. And as the gods watched him return, they knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. Baldur was no longer their beacon of hope. He was a symbol of their failure, of their inability to stop what was meant to be. As Baldur stood before them, the gods couldn't help but feel the weight of their own guilt. They had failed him, failed to protect him, failed to stop the prophecy from coming true. Baldur's return was not a blessing, it was a curse, a reminder of the price of their arrogance. The gods had tried to fight fate, and in doing so, they had sealed their own destruction. Baldur's return was a fleeting moment of hope in an otherwise hopeless world. And yet, it was clear that even he could not change what was coming. The world was on the brink of destruction, and there was no turning back as you stand there. Watching Baldur's final return, you can't help but wonder, what would you do if you were in the gods' shoes? Would you try to defy fate to bring someone back from death? Or would you accept the inevitability of the world's end? Baldur's story is a cautionary tale reminder that even the greatest of gods cannot escape their fate. And when the time comes for the gods to face their final battle in Ragnarok, it will be Baldur once again who will rise to play his part in the end of all things. Imagine standing on the edge of a crumbling world, the earth beneath your feet shaking as if it's about to swallow you whole. You look to the horizon, where darkness is spreading like an inevitable tide, and in the distance you can hear the sound of a serpent's hiss, a deep, menacing sound that echoes in your very bones. The serpent Jormungandr is awakening. It is said that when the serpent stirs, the world itself will tremble, for it is the harbinger of the end. And as the darkness approaches, you realize with a cold shiver that there's no turning back. The serpent's song is the final note, the last echo before the world collapses into nothingness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, is one of the most fearsome creatures in all of Norse mythology. Born of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, Jormungandr is a being of unimaginable size and power. The serpent encircles the entire world, so vast that it is said to bite its own tail in a constant, never-ending circle. It is a creature born of chaos, a force that is as inevitable as the tides themselves. And when Jormungandr moves, the world moves with it, trembling, shifting, and teetering on the brink of destruction. Historians still argue about the true nature of Jormungandr's role in Norse mythology. Some believe the serpent is merely a symbol of the primal forces of nature, a representation of the destructive power that exists within the world. Others see Jormungandr as a literal creature, a being that will one day bring about the end of the gods and the world itself. But regardless of how you interpret it, one thing is clear. Jormungandr is a key figure in the destruction that will come. The serpent's role in Ragnarok, the end of the world, is one of the most terrifying aspects of Norse mythology. It is said that when Jormungandr finally breaks free of its bonds, the oceans will rise, the earth will shake, and the heavens will darken. The serpent will rise from the depths of the sea, bringing with it the chaos and destruction that the gods have long feared. And as the serpent moves, it will trigger a series of events that will lead to the final battle between the gods and the forces of chaos. The true horror of Jormungandr's song, however, is not just in its physical presence, but in what it represents. The serpent is a symbol of fate, the inexorable, unchanging force that pulls everything towards its inevitable end. It is said that when Jormungandr breaks free, the world will collapse, not just because of the serpent's power, but because of the forces that have been set in motion. It is the culmination of everything that the gods have tried to control, every mistake they have made, and every act of defiance they have committed. The gods, in their arrogance, believed that they could control their fate, that they could bind Jormungandr and keep the serpent at bay. But in doing so, they only set the stage for their own destruction. The gods, much like the serpent, are trapped in a cycle they cannot escape. Their every action, every decision, brings them closer to the final battle. And as Jormungandr rises from the sea, the gods know that there is no escape from the fate that awaits them. The final battle, the culmination of everything that has been set in motion, will take place during Ragnarok. The gods, armed with all their strength and might, will face off against the forces of chaos, led by Jormungandr. It is said that the serpent will face Thor, the god of thunder, in a battle to the death. The two will fight with all their fury, their final struggle shaking the very foundations of the world. But even as they clash, it is clear that neither will emerge victorious. Thor will strike down the serpent, but in the process, he will be poisoned by its venom. His death will mark the beginning of the end for the gods, as their greatest warrior succumbs to the very force they sought to defeat. And as the serpent's final hiss fills the air, the world will crumble, the heavens will fall, and the age of the gods will come to an end. But in the end, it is not just the serpent's venom or its strength that brings about the world's destruction. It is the very song that Jormungandr sings. The serpent's song is the sound of inevitability, the sound of fate closing in. It is the final note in a symphony that has been playing since the beginning of time, and when it is sung, there will be no more gods, no more worlds, no more fate. Only silence. As you stand there, feeling the earth tremble beneath you, you realize that the serpent's song is not just a warning, it is a promise. A promise that no matter how hard the gods try to fight fate, no matter how much power they wield, the end is coming. And when the serpent rises, there will be no more hope, only the cold, dark certainty of destruction. You can hear the hiss now, faint but growing louder with every passing moment. The world is on the brink and there is nothing you can do to stop it. The serpent is coming, and with it, the end of everything. And as you listen to its song, you know that the final battle is near. Picture yourself standing before an ancient stone altar, weathered by time, its surface etched with symbols you can't quite decipher. You can almost feel the weight of the past pressing down on you, the secrets of the universe hidden in the lines of forgotten runes. Each symbol is a piece of the puzzle that holds the world together, and yet, as you run your fingers across the worn stone, you feel the eerie sense that something powerful is ready to be unleashed. The runes that bind fate are more than just writing. They are the key to unlocking the end of everything. You've seen the warning signs. The moment of reckoning is near, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The runes are one of the most powerful and mysterious elements in Norse mythology. They are not just symbols. They are the building blocks of reality, the keys to understanding fate itself. The runes are said to have been gifted to humanity by the god Odin, who sacrificed himself on Yggdrasil, the world tree, in order to gain the knowledge of the runes. And yet, despite their power, the runes carry a dark secretaire curse that is tied to the fate of the gods themselves. As Odin hung on the tree for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, he sought the wisdom of the runes. What he learned was not just a language of magic. He discovered a force that could alter the very fabric of existence. But with that knowledge came a price that Odin could never truly escape. The runes, powerful as they were also a reminder of the inevitable destruction that would come with Ragnarok, the end of the world. Historians still debate the true meaning of the runes and their connection to Ragnarok. Some argue that the runes represent the balance of life and death, of fate and free will, and that they are the key to understanding the end of all things. Others believe that the runes are warning symbols that point to the destruction of the gods, a cosmic fate that cannot be avoided. But one thing is certain: the runes are the thread that ties the world together, and when they are unraveled, so too is the fabric of existence. The curse of the runes is tied to the very essence of the gods' power. The gods, in their arrogance, believed they could control the forces of fate. They sought to bind the runes to their will, to use their power to shape the future. But in doing so, they made a grave mistake. They ignored the warnings embedded in the runes themselves. For while the runes can bring great power, they can also bring great destruction. And as the gods sought to master the runes, they unknowingly set in motion the events that would lead to their downfall. It is said that the runes themselves carry a curse that was embedded in the fabric of the cosmos when the gods first sought to wield their power. The curse of the runes is not just about destruction, it is about inevitability. The gods believed that they could control their fate, that they could bend the runes to their will. But the runes, in their ancient wisdom, know that no god, no mortal can escape the inevitability of Ragnarok. The runes are not just symbols of magic, they are symbols of fate, and fate cannot be changed. When the time of Ragnarok arrives, the runes will be the final key to unlocking the destruction of the gods. As the gods stand on the battlefield, facing the forces of chaos, they will realize too late that they have already been undone. The runes which they thought they controlled will unravel everything they have built. The curse of the runes will play its final note, and with it, the end of the world will be sealed. The runes are not just a tool of power, they are a reminder of the cost of defying fate. Odin, in his quest for knowledge, learned that the runes are not something to be mastered, but something to be respected. The moment the gods tried to control the runes, they sealed their own fate. The curse of the runes is a warning that no one can escape what is meant to be, not even the gods themselves. And as the final battle looms, the runes will play their part in the unraveling of everything the gods have known. As you stand before the altar, feeling the weight of the runes pressing down on you, you realize that the curse of the runes is not just a story, it is a warning to all who seek to control the forces of fate. The runes are not something to be wielded lightly, for in their power lies the destruction of the very world they help create. And when the final battle comes, when the runes are used to unlock the end of all things, you know that the curse will be complete. The gods' fall will be the result of their own hubris, their own desire to control the very forces of destiny. The runes will play their final song, the song of the end, and with it, the world will be undone. Word count 1099. Imagine walking through a dense, dark forest where the trees seem to lean in, their twisted branches reaching toward you like skeletal hands. The deeper you go, the more the light seems to fade, until the world is cloaked in shadow. It's not just the darkness of the woods, though. It's something far more chilling. Something ancient stirs in the underbrush, a presence that sends a shiver down your spine. A woman, Noah, which lurks here, with powers that have been cultivated over a lifetime of bitterness and revenge. Her heartbeat echoes through the stillness, a slow, rhythmic pulse that matches the beat of the world's impending end. You wonder, will you survive the meeting, or will you become part of her long, dark tale? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The witch of whom I speak is no ordinary woman. She is an enigma, born from a history of betrayal, loss, and a hunger for justice that turned into a consuming force of vengeance. Her name, whispered in hushed tones among the gods and mortals alike, is Angrboda, mother of the most fearsome children in all of Norse mythology. She is the mother of Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel, but her story goes beyond mere motherhood. It is the story of a woman who was scorned, a woman whose heart was broken by the gods themselves, and whose wrath would one day shape the very fate of the world. Angrboda's tale begins long before her infamous children were born. It begins with a betrayal so great that it forever altered the course of her life. Angrboda was once a giantess, a powerful figure in her own right, who lived far away from the realm of the gods. Yet, despite the distance, Loki, the trickster god, found his way to her. He seduced her, drawn by her beauty and strength. But Loki, ever the deceiver, had more than love in mind. His relationship with Angrboda was not born from affection, but from a desire to fulfill his darker plans. Historians still argue over whether Angrboda knew of Loki's true intentions. Was she merely a pawn in his game, or was she complicit in his schemes? Some say she was aware, and that her heart was as cold as the mountains from which she came. Others believe she was simply swept up by Loki's charm and the promise of something more than she had ever known. Regardless of her intentions, one thing is certain: she was betrayed. And from that betrayal a terrible curse was born. The gods, upon learning that Angrboda had birthed three of the most powerful beings in existence, saw the threat posed by her children. They were gods of chaos and destruction, and the gods feared what they could become. So, in their infinite wisdom, the gods decided to deal with the situation. They attempted to imprison Fenrir, to bind Jormungandr to the oceans, and to keep Hel locked away in her cold, shadowy domain. The gods feared these children, and their fear grew stronger with each passing day. They did not see the power Angrboda had wielded in giving birth to these creatures. They saw only a threat that had to be extinguished before it could take root. But Angrboda would not be silenced. Her heart, broken by the gods' treatment of her children, beat with an unrelenting desire for revenge. She was not some passive figure to be cast aside. She was the mother of the beasts that would one day bring about Ragnarok, and she would make sure that the gods understood the weight of their betrayal. Her children, born of both the gods and the giants, were her weapons, her means of striking back. And thus, the heartbeat of Angrboda became a symbol of vengeance that stretched through the ages. She crafted curses for each of her children, imbuing them with the power to one day bring about the downfall of the gods. Fenrir, the wolf, would be the instrument of Odin's death. Jormungandr, the serpent, would poison the world and bring destruction to the gods in the final battle. Hel, her daughter, would rule over the souls of the dead, trapping them in her shadowy realm and ensuring that the gods' debts would never be paid. Angrboda's revenge was not immediate. It was a long, patient burn that stretched across the ages. She nurtured her children in secrecy, knowing that one day they would be the ones to destroy the gods who had wronged her. And when the time came for the final battle at Ragnarok, Angrboda's children would rise to fulfill their destiny. The witch's heartbeat, however, is not just about vengeance. It's about the power of a mother's love turned dark. Angrboda's story is one of a woman who loved fiercely, who was betrayed, and who, in turn, became a force of chaos that shaped the fate of the gods themselves. Her heartbeat, slow and steady, is the rhythm of the world's end, reminder that sometimes the greatest forces of destruction are born from the deepest wounds. As you stand in the depths of her forest, You feel the weight of her curse hanging in the air. The heartbeat of Angraboa, though distant, is still there, slowly drawing closer, marking the passage of time. You wonder, what would you do if you were in her place? Would you seek vengeance for a betrayal so deep that it consumed everything you once loved? Or would you, too, be drawn into the darkness, knowing that vengeance, once ignited, can never truly be extinguished? The witch's heartbeat grows louder, and you realize that you are part of the story now. You can feel her power coursing through. The air and the world is slowly shifting toward its inevitable end. Now, picture yourself standing on the edge of a great battle, the air thick with the scent of blood and iron. The ground beneath you trembles as swords clash, shields shatter, and warriors cry out in fury. You're not just watching this battle, you are part of it. And at the heart of this chaos is a man, a hero, who believes that his fate is already sealed. His name is Sigurd, and he is destined to be both a legend and a tragedy. But as the swords fall around you, you realize that this man, this hero, will be the one whose death changes everything. For Sigurd, it was never just about slaying dragons or winning battles. It was about the consequences of a curse that he could never escape, no matter how bravely he fought. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sigurd is one of the greatest heroes in Norse mythology, known for his incredible strength and bravery. His most famous feat was slaying the dragon Fafnir, a beast so terrifying that it had hoarded a vast treasure for centuries. Sigurd, with the help of the gods and a magical sword, was able to defeat the dragon and claim the treasure as his own. But what makes Sigurd's story tragic isn't just his victory over the dragon, it's the curse that came with the treasure. A curse that would destroy everything he held dear. The curse of Fafnir's treasure was as old as the world itself. The treasure was forged by the gods, but it came with a heavy price. Fafnir, the dragon who hoarded it, was once a dwarf who had been transformed into a monster by the greed and envy that consumed him. The treasure was tainted by that same greed, and anyone who possessed it would be cursed to suffer from the very same hunger for wealth that had turned Fafnir into a beast. Sigurd, in his youth and ambition, did not know the full weight of the curse that would follow him. He saw only the glory and the riches. But Sigurd's curse wasn't just about gold. It was about betrayal, about love, and about a future he could never escape. After slaying Fafnir, Sigurd came into contact with the beautiful Valkyrie Brynhildr, who had been put into a deep sleep by Odin, awaiting a hero to wake her. Sigurd, with his courage and strength, was the one to awaken her, and they shared a bond that seemed unbreakable. However, as with all things in Norse mythology, love is rarely pure, and betrayal is never far away. Sigurd and Brynhildr's love was marked by a series of tragic events. While Sigurd was away, he was tricked into marrying Gudrun, another woman, by the manipulative schemes of the sorceress Grimhild. Sigurd, now bound to a promise he could not break, found himself torn between two women who he loved and one to whom he had pledged his loyalty. Brynhildr, heartbroken and betrayed, could not bear the thought of Sigurd's disloyalty and sought her own revenge. The tragedy of Sigurd's story lies in the fact that, despite his bravery and strength, he could not escape the curse of Fafnir's treasure. He was marked by betrayal at every turn, and the very thing that he had fought for, his glory, his love, would ultimately lead to his demise. Brynhildr, in her heartbreak and rage, conspired against him, and Sigurd was killed by those he trusted most, a victim of a web of deceit spun by the very people he thought he could rely on. Historians still debate whether Sigurd was truly a hero, or simply a pawn in the hands of fate. Was his downfall the result of his own choices, or was he doomed from the moment he took the cursed treasure? Some view him as a tragic figure, a man whose greatness was overshadowed by the forces of fate that he could never control. Others argue that Sigurd's downfall was a result of his own ambition, his desire to claim the treasure and the power it brought. But one thing is certain: Sigurd's death was the result of the curse, a curse that came with the gold and the glory, and it was a price that he could never escape. As you watch Sigurd's death unfold, you realize that his story is not just one of heroism, it is a reminder of the consequences of greed, of ambition, and of the power of fate. No matter how strong or brave Sigurd was, he could not outrun the curse that followed him. And in the end, it was the betrayal of those closest to him that led to his tragic end. But even in his death, Sigurd's legacy lives on. His story became a part of the great tapestry of Norse mythology, a tale of love, betrayal, and destiny. Sigurd's name is remembered as one of the greatest heroes of the Norse pantheon, but his story is also a cautionary one. It is a reminder that even the mightiest of heroes can be brought low by the curses of the past. And now, as you stand on the battlefield, watching Sigurd's life slip away, you wonder, how many heroes have fallen to the same fate? How many have been undone not by their own actions, but by the forces of fate and betrayal that they could never control? Sigurd's story is the story of a Sula, reminder that no matter how powerful we become, we are all ultimately at the mercy of forces greater than ourselves. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, the winds howling and lightning flashing across the sky, but the real danger isn't the weather, it's the knowledge that you're about to make a decision that could change everything. You've been trusted with a secret, a piece of information so powerful, so dangerous, that if it were revealed, it could destroy everything you hold dear. You know too much. And now, those who fear what you know are coming for you. The moment of truth is upon you. Do you stand and fight, or do you run and let the world burn? There is no easy answer. There is only the inevitable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tale of the one who knew too much begins with a man, an ordinary man. Some might say, but he was anything but ordinary. His name was Videland, and he was a master blacksmith, a craftsman whose skill with the forge was unmatched. He could shape the hardest of metals, craft weapons of unimaginable power, and even create treasures that no mortal or god could resist. Yet, it was not his skill in the forge that made Vakland's story one of tragedies. It was his knowledge of something far darker, something that would lead him into a battle against the gods themselves. Vakland was once a free man, a man who lived on his own terms. But one day, everything changed. He was captured by a king, a ruler who saw in Videland not just a craftsman, but a tool, someone to be used to further his own ambitions. The king, desiring to control Vakland's incredible skill, imprisoned him and forced him to work for him, forging weapons and treasures that could make the king's kingdom unrivaled. But Vetland was not a man to be controlled. Over time, he began to see that the king's desires were no different from those of the gods, who had always manipulated fate for their own purposes. He realized that the king, like the gods, had become a force of destruction, and that he too had the power to shape the world with the knowledge he had amassed. But knowledge is a dangerous thing. Vakland's mind was a well of secrets, and as he forged weapons, he also forged plans to escape his captivity, plans to exact revenge on the king and all who had wronged him. Yet, as he crafted these schemes, he knew the cost. He knew that revealing the truth of the king's corruption would set off a chain of events that no one could stop. The king's secrets, the things Videland had uncovered, were far more dangerous than any weapon he could forge. They could bring about the downfall of not just a kingdom, but a godly order that had existed for eons. The gods themselves had their hands in the king's affairs, and if Vetland spoke out, it would bring about a war between gods and men, one that could destroy everything. But what could Vetland do? Could he stand by and let the gods, the kings, and the powerful continue to dominate the lives of those who had no voice? Or did he have a responsibility to reveal the truth, even if it meant his own destruction? As Vetland planned his revenge, he realized that he was not just a man of craftsmanship, but a man of destiny. The moment he chose to act, the moment he chose to reveal what he knew, would determine his fate and the fate of the world. But this knowledge was a double-edged sword. If he spoke, he would be destroyed. If he remained silent, the world would remain on its destructive path, with no one to stop the cycle of manipulation and control. Historians still debate the morality of Vokland's decision. Was he justified in seeking revenge, or was he blinded by his own ambition? Some see him as a hero, a man who stood up against the gods, against the forces of fate that had kept him captive for so long. Others see him as a fool, a man who, in seeking to reveal the truth, destroyed everything he loved. What is clear, however, is that Vokland's knowledge was too powerful to be kept hidden. It was a force that could tear down kingdoms, challenge gods, and reshape the world itself. As you stand in the midst of this storm, the weight of knowledge heavy on your shoulders, you begin to feel the burden of Vokland's decision. The world is waiting for you to act, to choose whether to speak the truth or keep silent. And no matter what you choose, you know that the consequences will be immense. Knowledge is power, but it is also a curse. The moment you know too much, you become a target, a threat to those who wish to keep their secrets safe. The gods, the kings, the powerful, they will stop at nothing to ensure that you do not reveal what you know. And in this moment, you realize that there is no escape. You can only move forward, knowing that your actions will change the course of history. The battle that will follow is not just one of swords and shields, but one of knowledge and consequence. It is a battle that pits the gods against man, truth against deception, fate against free will. And in the end, only one can emerge victorious. Will you stand with Vokland and reveal the truth, or will you let the world continue to turn bound by the lies and manipulation of those who hold the power? Imagine standing at the precipice of the end, a world teetering on the edge of annihilation. The sky above is thick with swirling clouds, as if the very heavens are writhing in agony. The earth shakes beneath your feet, tremors of an impending doom that can no longer be avoided. Before you, you see three figures, three beings who have been destined to bring about the fall of the gods. They are Loki's children, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel. They are no longer the innocent creatures they once were, but the agents of destruction, the living embodiment of vengeance. And in this final moment, you know that nothing can stop the cataclysm that is about to unfold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Loki, the trickster god, is one of the most complex figures in Norse mythology. He was neither fully evil nor fully good, but a being who played both sides in a game that only he truly understood. Loki's children, however, were not given the same ambiguous nature. They were fated to bring about the destruction of the gods, and their path to vengeance was laid out for them from the very moment of their birth. Fenrir, the great wolf, was the first of Loki's children. From the moment he was born, it was clear that he was no ordinary creature. The gods, fearing the prophecy that he would one day bring about the death of Odin, attempted to bind him, but every chain they used was broken with ease. Finally, they turned to the dwarves who forged the magical chain. Gleipnir and Fenrir was bound-tricked into submission. Yet even in his chains, Fenrir was destined to play his part in the downfall of the gods. His fate was sealed when he bit off the hand of Tyr, the god of war, in a final act of defiance. Fenrir's vengeance would not be satisfied until he tore apart Odin, his father's greatest enemy. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, was the second of Loki's children. Wrapped around the world, the serpent grew so large that it could encircle the earth, its tail in its mouth. The gods feared Jarmangander's power, for it was said that when the serpent released its tail, the end of the world would come. The serpent's role in Ragnarok was clear. He would poison the world with his venom, and in the final battle, he would face Thor, the god of thunder. Their struggle would end in mutual destruction. Thor would slay Jarmangander, but he would succumb to the serpent's poison shortly after, a symbol of the inescapable consequences of their conflict. And then there was Hel, the third of Loki's children, who ruled over the realm of the dead. Half living and half dead, Hel's appearance was a reflection of her domain. Half of her body was beautiful, while the other half was a decaying corpse. She ruled over those who died of sickness and old age, the souls that were neither brave enough to enter Valhalla, nor dishonored enough to end up in Hel's shadowy depths. But despite her cold exterior, Hel was more than just a ruler of the dead. She was a symbol of the gods' failure to truly understand the consequences of their actions. Hel was the keeper of the dead, but she was also a reminder that death was inescapable, even for the gods. The last vengeance of Loki's children was not simply the result of their hatred for the gods. It was the culmination of the gods' own mistakes. The gods, in their arrogance and fear, had believed that they could control fate, that they could bind the forces that would one day destroy them. But by trying to control these forces, they only ensured their own downfall. Fenrir, Jarmangander, and Hel were not just the agents of destruction. They were the reckoning for the gods' manipulation of fate. As Ragnarok dawns, Loki's children rise to fulfill their destiny. Fenrir breaks free from his chains, his eyes locked on Odin as he charges toward him with a ferocity unmatched. Jarmangander rises from the depths, his vast body coiling through the sky as he releases a wave of venom that poisons the earth. And Hel, the ruler of the dead, marches forth with her army of souls, ready to claim the gods who once turned their backs on her. The final battle is a clash of titanic forces, a collision of fate and free will. The gods, despite their might, cannot escape the consequences of their actions. The vengeance of Loki's children is not just about the death of the gods, it is about the breaking of the cycle. The gods, in their attempt to control fate, had sealed their own destruction. And now, as the final battle rages on, it is clear that the world will be remade. The old gods will fall, but from their ashes, new life will emerge. The children of Loki have not only fulfilled the prophecy of Ragnarok, they have rewritten the very fabric of existence. As you stand on the battlefield watching the gods and their enemies clash, you feel the weight of fate pressing down on you. You realize that the vengeance of Loki's children is not just a tale of destruction, it is a story of the inevitability of change, of the forces that shape the world beyond our control. The gods, for all their power, were not immune to the forces of fate, and now, at the end of all things, the children of Loki stand victorious. And in this moment, you understand that the last vengeance of Loki's children is not just their revenge, it is the end of one world and the beginning of another. The old gods have fallen, and a new era is about to begin. As the smoke of battle clears and the sounds of clashing swords fade into silence, you stand on the edge of a world reborn, yet still heavy with the weight of all that has passed. The earth is scarred, the sky still dark with the remnants of Ragnarok. But in the distance, a faint glimmer of light breaks through the darkness. The old gods are gone, their reign ended by the very forces they sought to control. The children of Loki, those fated agents of chaos, have delivered their vengeance. The prophecy has been fulfilled, and the world stands on the precipice of something new. But amidst the devastation, you cannot help but feel a sense of quiet. The winds, once howling, have now calmed. The stars begin to emerge in the sky, the first signs of a dawn that was once thought impossible. The finality of the battle is undeniable, yet there is a strange sense of peace in the air. The vengeance has been exacted, the world reshaped, and all that is left is to wait, to breathe, and to acknowledge the profound weight of the cycle now complete. You stand alone for a moment, listening to the soft rhythm of the world as it begins to heal. The heartbeat of the earth, like that of Angerboa's cursed heart, slows, settling into a new rhythm. It is as if the world itself is catching its breath, mourning the old and embracing the new. The ruins of the god's kingdom fade into the past, and the future, though uncertain, is free from the shackles of the old cycle. And yet, in this moment of quiet, one question remains: what now? What happens when the dust settles and the vengeance has been fulfilled? What comes after the end of all things? As you reflect on the journey of Loki's children, on the endless cycles of revenge and fate, you realize that while the world may change, the forces that drive it endure: love, vengeance, and the relentless march of time will remain. The gods are gone, but their legacy will echo through the ages, shaping the lives of those who follow. The children of Loki, despite their victory, will forever be marked by the curses of their heritage, bound to the world in ways they can never fully escape. For now, there is nothing left to do but breathe, to embrace the stillness, and to reflect on the lessons of the past. The world has ended, but from its ashes, something new will rise. Perhaps a better world, perhaps not. But in this moment, everything is possible. The storm has passed, and you, like the earth, are left to heal and find your place in the new world that emerges from the ruins. Now, dim the lights once more. Let the stillness settle over you, and remember, it is the quiet after the storm that speaks the loudest.